In the suffocating autumn of 1859, in the isolated frontier town of Dust Creek, Nevada Territory, a 7-year-old boy named Thomas, Little Fox, Running Bear became the center of one of the most bewildering and terrifying medical cases ever documented in the American West before statehood. Dr. Harrison Cole, a former military surgeon who had settled in the territory after the Mexican-American War, filled 2 leather-bound journals with observations about a child whose capabilities defied every known law of human nature. The boy appeared ordinary at first glance, small, wiry, with eyes the color of dark river stones that rarely blinked and skin the color of sun-baked earth. But behind that harmless appearance dwelled an intelligence that the science of the era simply could not classify or comprehend. During 7 terrifying months, 8 people died under inexplicable circumstances after interacting with Thomas Running Bear. All were found with their eyes wide open, as if they had witnessed something beyond human comprehension in their final moments. The boy claimed to hear voices coming from the mountains, voices that whispered secrets, revealed hidden truths, and announced imminent deaths. He knew things that no child should know, precise details about geological formations no one had taught him, knowledge of silver deposits that had not yet been discovered, intimate secrets that people had never shared with anyone. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment which state or territory you're listening from. Thank you, and let's keep going. Official records were partially destroyed in a fire at the territorial capital in 1863, but Dr. Cole's journal survived, hidden in the walls of his former cabin for over a century. What these documents reveal about Thomas Running Bear challenges our understanding of the limits of the human mind and raises disturbing questions about the existence of capabilities that science still cannot explain. This is a story about a child whose gifts terrified white society, whose intelligence threatened the very foundation of a system built on claiming native inferiority, and whose fate reminds us of the countless brilliant native minds that were silenced, hidden, or destroyed because they dared to be extraordinary. Before we continue with the story of Thomas Running Bear and the terror that descended upon Dust Creek, if this account is piquing your curiosity, make sure to subscribe to our channel and ring that notification bell so you never miss our deep dives into America's darkest historical mysteries. And please let us know in the comments what state or territory you're listening from. We love hearing from our community of mystery enthusiasts around the world. Thomas Running Bear was born in the spring of 1852 in a Shoshone village hidden deep in the Ruby Mountains, one of the last free bands that had not been forced onto reservations or decimated by the diseases that had swept through native communities for decades. His mother, White Fawn, was known among her people as a dreamer, one who could interpret visions and guide the band through difficult times. She had survived the smallpox outbreak of 1849 by heeding a dream that told her to move the village higher into the mountains, away from the traders who brought the sickness. His father, Broken Arrow, had been killed by a prospector's bullet 2 years before Thomas was born, shot while hunting deer that the prospector claimed belonged to him by right of discovery. When Thomas was 4 years old, White Fawn developed a fever that wouldn't break. The band's healer, an old woman named Sage Woman, used every remedy she knew, herbal teas, sweat lodges, prayers to the spirits, but nothing helped. Thomas would sit beside his mother, his small hand clutching hers, and he would tell her things that frightened her. "Mother," he whispered one night, his voice carrying a weight no child's voice should hold, "the spirits in the mountains are singing to me. They say you will join our ancestors before the snow melts. They say you will watch over me from the spirit world." White Fawn died 3 weeks later, in February of 1856, her fever finally taking her despite everything the band tried. He was only 4 years old, but he did not cry at her funeral. He stood silent and still as sage woman sang the death song, and the others placed his mother's body on a scaffold facing east, where her spirit could begin its journey to the land of ancestors. When asked why he didn't weep, Thomas simply said, "She's still here. She talks to me now like the spirits in the mountains. She says she's finally free from pain." The other members of the band began to fear the child. There was something in his eyes, they whispered, something old and knowing that shouldn't exist in someone so young. He would stare at people with an intensity that made them uncomfortable, as if he could see through their skin and into their souls. Sage woman told the others that Thomas had been born with the veil, a sign that he could see into both worlds, the world of the living and the world of spirits. "That boy carries the gift," Sage woman warned. "He knows things that ain't meant to be known by folks still walking this earth. The spirits chose him for a purpose, but that purpose will bring danger as well as power." The band's survival depended on staying hidden, on avoiding contact with the white settlers and prospectors who were increasingly encroaching on their traditional lands. Thomas's gifts, his visions, his knowledge, his strange ability to predict where game would be found and where danger lurked. These things helped the band survive, but they also made him a target. When he was 6, a group of prospectors stumbled upon the village's location while chasing a stray mule. The band scattered into the mountains, but Thomas was separated from the others during the confusion. He wandered for 3 days, living on berries and stream water, before he was found by a Pony Express rider named Jeremiah Stokes. Stokes was a man of contradictions, a former trapper who had married a Cheyenne woman and maintained complicated relationships with the native peoples of the region. He recognized Thomas's Shoshone features and knew that the boy would be in danger if left alone in the mountains, especially with tensions rising between settlers and tribes. He took Thomas to the nearest settlement, Dust Creek, hoping to find someone who could help reunite the boy with his people. But Dust Creek in 1858 was not a place where a native child could expect kindness. The town had been founded 2 years earlier after a silver strike, and its population consisted primarily of prospectors, merchants, and adventurers who viewed native people as obstacles to progress at best and vermin to be eliminated at worst. Jeremiah Stokes had to physically protect Thomas from men who wanted to take the boy and sell him, or worse, use him for target practice. He finally brought Thomas to the only person in Dust Creek who might be willing to help, Dr. Harrison Cole. Dr. Cole was a rarity in the frontier, a man who had seen enough death and suffering in the Mexican-American War to develop a deep skepticism about claims of racial superiority. He had treated native patients during his years as an army surgeon, and had learned to respect their medical knowledge and their humanity. When Stokes appeared at his door with a frightened but composed Shoshone boy, Dr. Cole didn't hesitate to offer shelter. "What's your name, son?" "Doctor," Cole asked when the boy was settled with a bowl of stew and a blanket. Thomas looked at him with those intense, dark eyes and said, "Thomas Running Bear. My mother named me Thomas after a missionary who passed through our village when I was born. She said the name would help me move between worlds. She was right. The spirit started talking to me before I could talk back to them." Dr. Cole was not a superstitious man. He had been trained in the rational methods of scientific medicine, at a time when many doctors still relied on bloodletting and purging. He believed in observation evidence and the power of the human mind to understand the natural world. But there was something about Thomas that challenged his commitment to pure rationalism. The boy spoke with a clarity and vocabulary that should have been impossible for a child who had never attended school. He described the geological formations of the surrounding mountains with precision that experienced prospectors struggled to achieve. And when he talked about the spirits, There was no hint of madness or confusion in his demeanor, only a calm acceptance of a reality that others couldn't perceive. Dr. Cole made Thomas a proposition. He could stay in his cabin, not as a servant or a ward, but as a subject of medical study. He would provide the boy with food, shelter, and protection in exchange for his cooperation in helping Dr. Cole understand his unusual abilities. "I want to document what you can do," he explained. "I want to understand how your mind works. But I will not treat you as a specimen or a curiosity. You will be treated with dignity and respect, and if at any time you wish to leave, I will help you find your people or another safe place." Thomas considered his offer with a seriousness that seemed far beyond his years. "The spirits say you're different from the others," he finally said. "They say you've seen enough death to know that life is precious in all its forms. They say you're trying to understand things that scare most folks. I'll stay with you, Dr. Cole. But you need to know something. The people who come near me, the people who carry hatred in their hearts or violence on their minds, they don't live very long. I don't kill them. I just know when death is coming for them, and sometimes the spirits make sure it happens faster than it would have otherwise." This statement should have frightened Dr. Cole away. Instead, it deepened his fascination. He had studied cases of unusual mental abilities in his medical training. Stories of people with exceptional memory, individuals who could perform complex mathematical calculations instantly, children who could reproduce musical compositions after hearing them only once. But Thomas seemed to represent something different, something that bridged the gap between exceptional cognitive ability and something that his scientific framework couldn't easily categorize. He wasn't just intelligent. He seemed to possess knowledge that he couldn't have acquired through normal learning. He didn't just have good intuition. He appeared to know specific details about people and events that no observation could have revealed. Dr. Cole began his systematic study of Thomas running bear in September of 1858, just weeks after the boy came to live in his cabin. He created detailed records of their daily interactions, documenting his statements, his behaviors, and the uncanny accuracy of his predictions. What he discovered both amazed and terrified him. Thomas could describe the location of underground water sources with perfect accuracy, despite never having studied geology or dowsing. He could predict when storms were coming, often days before any change was visible in the sky. He knew intimate details about the lives of people he had never met, their fears, their secrets, their sins. "How do you know these things?" Dr. Cole asked repeatedly, trying to find a rational explanation for abilities that seemed to defy natural law. Thomas's answer was always the same. "The spirits tell me. They come from the mountains, from the places where my ancestors are buried. They're people who died with unfinished business, with truths that need to be told. They use me to speak because I was born with the ability to hear them. My mother said it runs in our family. Her mother had it and her mother before her. It's a gift and a curse, Dr. Cole. I know things I don't want to know. I see things I wish I couldn't see." The first death that occurred after Thomas came to live with Dr. Cole happened in October of 1858. Silas Granger, a prospector who had made a small fortune in the silver fields and used his wealth to indulge his worst impulses, came to Dust Creek to restock supplies and celebrate his latest strike. Granger was known throughout the territory for his cruelty, particularly toward native people. He boasted of having killed at least a dozen Shoshone and Paiute men, women, and children during his years in the mountains. He claimed their deaths as proof of his superiority, as trophies of his conquest of the frontier. Thomas was in the general store with Dr. Cole when Granger walked in, drunk and loud, demanding whiskey and bragging about his latest exploits. The moment Thomas saw the man, his face went pale and his entire body tensed. The spirits erupted in his mind with a fury unlike anything he had experienced before. "That man," Thomas said, his voice trembling. "The spirits are screaming about him. They say he killed my father. They say he shot Broken Arrow while he was hunting deer, shot him for sport and left his body for the wolves. They say he's killed 47 of my people, 47 souls crying for justice." Granger heard the boy's words and laughed. "What's this? A little savage making accusations. I should put a bullet in you too, boy, and save the territory the trouble of dealing with your kind." Dr. Cole stepped between them, his hand on the pistol he always carried. "You'll do no such thing, Granger. This boy is under my protection. You'll leave this store now, or I'll ensure every lawman in the territory knows about your boasts and what they mean." Granger laughed again but left, muttering threats and promising that the boy's time would come. 3 days later, Granger was found dead in his cabin. The official cause of death was listed as a heart attack, but Dr. Cole, who was called to examine the body, noted several disturbing details. Granger's eyes were wide open, frozen in an expression of absolute terror. His mouth was open as if he had been screaming, and there were marks on his wrists that looked almost like finger impressions, though no one had been with him in the cabin. When Dr. Cole returned home and told Thomas what had happened, the boy showed no surprise. The spirit said he wouldn't leave the mountains alive. Thomas explained calmly. They said the 47 he killed were waiting for him on the trail between his cabin and town. They said it was time for him to answer for what he did. Dr. Cole felt a chill run down his spine. "Thomas," he said carefully, "are you telling me that you somehow caused Mr. Granger's death?" The boy shook his head. "I didn't cause anything, Dr. Cole. I just knew it was going to happen. The spirits don't lie about these things. When they say someone's time is finished, when they say someone has debts to pay in blood and suffering, it always comes true. I'm just the messenger." Investigation into Granger's cabin revealed something even more disturbing. Hidden beneath the floorboards, wrapped in oilcloth, was a collection of items that Granger had taken from his victims. Moccasins, beadwork, a child's small handprint pressed into clay, a medicine pouch containing sacred herbs. These were trophies, proof of lives taken and families destroyed. Thomas identified each item, describing the person it had belonged to, how they had died, what their spirits had told him about their final moments. The townspeople who heard these accounts were shaken, not just by the accuracy of Thomas's descriptions, but by the realization that Granger's boasts had been true. He really had killed dozens of native people, and he had kept their possessions as souvenirs. The second death came in November, just weeks after Granger's mysterious demise. Reverend Matthew Thornton, the self-appointed preacher who held services in the Dust Creek Saloon every Sunday, was a man who spoke eloquently about God's love while quietly participating in schemes to cheat native people out of their land and resources. He served as a go-between for prospectors and tribal leaders, using his position to negotiate treaties that were never honored and to gather intelligence that helped settlers locate valuable mineral deposits on native land. To his white congregation, he was a man of God bringing civilization to the wilderness. To the native people of the region, he was something else entirely, a man who used scripture to justify theft and used his position of trust to enable the destruction of entire communities. Thomas encountered Reverend Thornton at the assay office, where Dr. Cole had taken him to watch the process of evaluating silver ore. The Reverend approached them with his characteristic smile, the one that never quite reached his eyes. "Dr. Cole," he said warmly, "I see you've taken in young Thomas. What a charitable act. Though I must caution you about the dangers of educating these people beyond their station. God has ordained a place for every creature, and to disturb that natural order is to invite chaos and disorder." Thomas looked up at the Reverend with those dark, penetrating eyes and said, "You don't believe in God. The spirits say you stopped believing years ago, after you helped the prospectors find the silver on Shoshone land. You knew the treaty said the land belonged to my people forever, but you helped them take it anyway. The spirits say you hear the crying of children in your dreams every night, children who starved because their fathers couldn't hunt on land that was stolen. They say you drink yourself to sleep trying to forget, but you never can. They say your time is coming soon, and you'll have to face all the people you hurt, all the families you destroyed." The change in Reverend Thornton's expression was immediate and terrifying. The warm facade dropped away, revealing something cold and vicious underneath. "That boy is possessed by demons," he hissed at Dr. Cole. "He speaks blasphemy and lies. I will pray for his soul, but I warn you, keeping him in your home is inviting evil into your life." He left the assay office quickly, his hands shaking, his face pale beneath his carefully maintained beard. 2 weeks later, Reverend Thornton was found dead in his cabin, slumped over his desk with an empty bottle of laudanum beside him. The official verdict was suicide, a tragedy explained away as a sudden mental breakdown brought on by exhaustion and melancholy. But Dr. Cole, examining the body at the request of the local authorities, noted that the Reverend's eyes held that same look of terror he had seen in Granger's corpse. His desk was covered with papers, letters he had been writing to various people, apparently attempting to make amends for past actions. One letter was addressed to the Shoshone Tribal Council, apologizing for his role in the land theft and providing detailed information about the prospectors who had benefited from his betrayal. The letter was unfinished, ending mid-sentence, as if Thornton had been interrupted by something that terrified him so completely that he chose death over facing it. When Dr. Cole returned home and found Thomas sitting quietly by the fire, he didn't know what to say. The boy looked up at him with eyes that seemed to hold centuries of sorrow and knowledge. He couldn't live with what he'd done anymore. Thomas said softly. The spirits followed him everywhere. They whispered the names of all the people he'd hurt, all the families he'd helped destroy. They showed him what happened to the children who starved, how they died crying for food in a land that had always provided for their people. The Reverend always knew it was wrong, Dr. Cole. He just chose comfort and position over doing what was right. The spirits don't forgive that kind of choice. Dr. Cole sat down heavily in his chair, his medical rationalism struggling against the evidence accumulating before his eyes. "Thomas," he said carefully, "you need to understand how dangerous this is. People are dying after they encounter you. Even if you're not directly causing their deaths, the connection is becoming obvious. There are people in this town who already fear you, who see you as something unnatural. If more deaths occur, I won't be able to protect you from accusations of witchcraft or demonic possession." Thomas closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them and looked at Dr. Cole with an expression of profound sadness. "I know, Dr. Cole. I've always known. That's why my people have always kept gifts like mine hidden. That's why my mother taught me to be quiet, to never let the white folks see what I could really do. But sometimes the spirits are so loud that I can't help but speak. Sometimes the things they show me are so terrible that staying silent feels like being part of the evil. I didn't ask for this gift, but I have it, and the spirits say there's a reason. They say I'm supposed to help bring truth to light, even when the truth is painful and dangerous." The pattern continued over the following months. People who came into contact with Thomas, people who carried guilt or evil in their hearts, began dying under mysterious circumstances. Not everyone, only those whom the spirits marked as deserving of judgment. A land speculator named Harold Payne, who had made his fortune by defrauding native families of their land claims, died when his horse inexplicably bolted, and threw him into a ravine. Thomas had seen Payne in town 2 days before and had told Dr. Cole, "That man has stolen land from 30 families. He's left them with nothing, not even a place to bury their dead. The spirits say he'll die the same way he killed others, suddenly and without warning." A woman named Margaret Cheney, who ran a boarding house where native travelers were routinely cheated and sometimes robbed, died in her sleep with her face frozen in a silent scream. Thomas had encountered her at the market and had said quietly, "She poisons the food when native people won't pay her inflated prices." The spirits showed me 3 men who died because they couldn't afford her rates. She'll die by poison too, not from anyone's hand, but from the fear that eats her alive from the inside. Each death was technically explainable through natural causes or accidents, but the pattern was unmistakable to anyone paying attention. Thomas Running Bear knew things he shouldn't know. He predicted deaths with uncanny accuracy. And the people who died were invariably those who had committed terrible acts, particularly acts of cruelty toward native people. It was as if Thomas served as a conduit for some form of cosmic justice, a vessel through which the accumulated suffering and rage of his people found voice and retribution. Dr. Cole's journals from this period reveal his growing confusion and fear. He was a scientist trained to observe and document phenomena according to rational principles, but Thomas challenged every framework he had for understanding the world. He conducted tests, trying to determine if his knowledge came from some form of heightened observational ability, or perhaps an exceptional memory that allowed him to recall and connect details that others missed. But the evidence consistently pointed to something beyond natural explanation. Thomas knew things he could not have observed. He described events he could not have witnessed. He predicted outcomes that no amount of careful deduction could have foreseen. The boy possesses knowledge that defies conventional explanation, Dr. Cole wrote in his journal in January of 1859. He describes the location of mineral deposits he has never seen. He knows the composition of underground water sources without any testing equipment. He can look at a person and tell me details about their past that he could not possibly have learned through normal means. Most disturbing of all, he predicts deaths with an accuracy that I can no longer dismiss as coincidence. I am forced to conclude that Thomas Running Bear either possesses some form of extrasensory perception that science has not yet discovered, or he is indeed in contact with something beyond our material world. As a physician and a man of science, I find myself confronting the possibility that our understanding of human consciousness and the nature of reality itself may be fundamentally incomplete. The community's reaction to Thomas grew increasingly hostile as the pattern of deaths became more obvious. White residents of Dust Creek began to whisper that the boy was cursed, that he brought death wherever he went, that Dr. Cole was foolish and dangerous for keeping him in his household. The small native population that still passed through the region had a different reaction. Many saw Thomas as a kind of avenging spirit, a child chosen by the ancestors to bring justice to those who had escaped earthly punishment. Some believed he was a prophet. Others thought he might be one of the old spirits made flesh. But all recognized that Thomas was no ordinary child. Sage woman, who had survived the scattering of the band and now lived with a small group of Shoshone in the mountains above Dust Creek, sought out Thomas in February of 1859. She found the boy sitting by the creek that ran behind Dr. Cole's cabin, staring at the water as if he could see something beneath its surface. "Grandson," she said softly, "I need to talk to you about what you are and what you can do." Thomas looked up at her with those knowing eyes. "You're going to tell me about the old ways," Thomas said. "About the people who came before us, the ones who carried the gift across the Bering Strait and through all the generations. You're going to tell me that what I have isn't strange or evil. It's part of who we are as a people. Sage woman sat down beside the child, her aged joints creaking with the motion. Your mother had it too, she said, and her mother before her. It goes back and back all the way to the first people, to the ones who learned to hear the spirits because they had no other way to survive. They tried to beat it out of us, tried to make us forget our power. But some families kept it alive, passed it down in whispers and warnings. What you have, Thomas, it's called different things by different people. Some call it the sight. Some call it walking between worlds. Some say it's the voice of the ancestors speaking through the living. Whatever name you give it, it's real and it's dangerous, especially for a native child in a world that don't want us to have any power at all. Thomas listened intently as sage woman explained the history that had been partially hidden from him, the traditions that had been preserved despite every attempt to erase them. He learned about the shamans who could see sickness before it manifested, about the wise ones who could communicate with the dead and bring messages from the other side, about the dreamers who could predict the movements of game and the coming of weather. He learned that his gift was not a curse or an aberration, but a connection to something ancient and powerful, a link to the spiritual traditions of his ancestors that had survived centuries of displacement and destruction. But you need to be careful, grandson, sage woman warned. The white folks are already scared of you. They're scared because you represent everything they tell themselves ain't true. That we're just as human as them, just as capable, just as connected to something greater than themselves. And now you're showing them something even more frightening. That maybe we got gifts and abilities that they don't understand and can't control. They'll come for you eventually, Thomas. They always come for the ones who show too much power, too much knowledge, too much light. You need to learn when to hide what you can do, when to play small so they don't destroy you. Thomas nodded slowly, understanding the wisdom in the old woman's words. But even as he listened, he knew that hiding was not going to be possible for much longer. The spirits were getting louder, more insistent. They were showing him things that were coming. Terrible things that would shake the very foundations of the world he lived in. They were showing him a war that would tear the country apart. Though this war would be different from the one the spirits had shown him before. This war would be between the settlers and the tribes, a conflict that would rage across the entire West. They were showing him rivers of blood and fields of the dead, entire villages wiped out, children sold into slavery, treaties broken as soon as they were signed. They were showing him his own future, short and bright and tragic, a candle that would burn intensely before being extinguished by forces too powerful to resist. The turning point came in March of 1859, when Thomas encountered a man who would challenge everything he thought he knew about his gifts and their purpose. This man was different from the others Thomas had met. He didn't carry the same guilt or evil that had marked the previous victims. His name was William Bent, and he was a fur trader who had lived among the Cheyenne for 20 years. Married a Cheyenne woman, and raised children who moved between two worlds. But William Bent was also dying slowly and painfully of a wasting disease that was consuming his body from the inside. Thomas met Bent at Dr. Cole's cabin when the trader came seeking medical treatment for his mysterious ailment. The moment Thomas saw him, the spirits erupted in a cacophony unlike anything he had experienced before. They weren't condemning Bent or calling for his death. Instead, they were whispering a warning. "He's like you," they said urgently. "He has the gift too, but he uses it differently. He uses it to see into the hearts of both whites and natives, to find common ground where others see only enemies. He can see into people's souls, but he uses that vision for peace, for understanding. He's what you could become if you stay on the right path." Dr. Cole noticed Thomas's reaction immediately. The boy had gone pale, his entire body trembling as if he were in the grip of a fever. "Thomas, what's wrong?" he asked, concerned. Thomas couldn't answer immediately. His mind was overwhelmed with the realization that he was not unique, that the gift he possessed could exist in others, could be used for purposes that aligned with the spirit's intentions rather than perverting them. William Bent had been born with the same ability to see beyond the surface, to know things about people that were hidden from normal observation. And instead of using that gift for judgment or revenge, Bent had used it to build bridges, to help two peoples understand each other, to prevent conflicts before they could erupt into violence. William Bent looked at Thomas with eyes that held a terrible recognition. Well, he said softly, his voice carrying a mixture of surprise and understanding. "I've heard the stories about you, boy. The child who knows things he shouldn't know, who predicts deaths and speaks truths that frighten good Christian folk. I didn't believe the tales until now, but I can see it in you. That same spark I see in my own mirror when I look too long. You're like me, Thomas, running bare. We're both cursed or blessed, depending on how you look at it, to see the world as it really is, stripped of all the pretty lies people tell themselves." Thomas found his voice, though it came out strained. "The spirits told me about you. They said you use your gift differently. They said you use it to help people, to bring understanding instead of judgment." Bent nodded slowly. "I've spent my whole life trying to be a bridge, Thomas. Trying to help my white brothers and my native brothers see each other as human. It's been hard, harder than you can imagine. I've been called a traitor by both sides. Whites say I've gone native. Natives say I'm still white under the skin. But the gift, it shows me the truth. It shows me that we're all just people, all just trying to survive in a world that doesn't make much sense. And that truth, that knowledge, it's kept me going even when everything else seemed hopeless." Thomas felt something shift inside him. For the first time since his mother's death, he saw a path forward that didn't involve becoming a weapon of vengeance. Bent showed him that the gift could be used for healing, for connection, for building rather than destroying. But Bent also warned him. "The gift will always be dangerous, Thomas. It will always make people afraid. They'll always want to destroy what they don't understand. But if you can find a way to use it for good, to use it to bring light instead of darkness, then maybe, just maybe, you can make a difference. That's what I've tried to do. I don't know if I've succeeded, but I've tried." Bent died 2 months later, in May of 1859. His body finally succumbing to the disease that had been consuming him. But before he died, he did something that would change Thomas's life irrevocably. He gave Thomas a medicine pouch that had belonged to his Cheyenne wife, who had died years earlier. "She had the gift too," Bent said, his voice weak but clear. "She saw things, new things. This pouch contains sacred objects that helped her focus her visions, helped her understand what the spirits were telling her. Maybe it will help you too. And Thomas, remember what I told you. The gift can be used for judgment, or it can be used for healing. The choice is yours. The spirits show you what's possible, but you're the one who decides what to do with that knowledge." Thomas took the pouch and held it close. He could feel the spirits stirring within it, old spirits, wise spirits, spirits that had guided Bent's wife through her own journey with the gift. For the first time, he felt like he had a connection to something larger than himself, something that included not just the voices of the dead, but the wisdom of those who had come before and learned to use their gifts for good. After Bent's death, Thomas became more contemplative, more careful about how he used his abilities. He still heard the spirits, still saw the visions they sent, but he began to question whether acting on every vision was truly justice or merely his own desire for revenge against a world that had taken everything from him. He began to ask the spirits for guidance, for wisdom, for understanding of how to use his gift in ways that honored his mother's memory and Bent's example. The eighth and final death that would occur during Thomas's time in Dust Creek happened in September of 1859. And it was the death that would force Dr. Cole to make an impossible choice about the boy's future. The victim was Marshal Jedediah Stone, the law enforcement officer for Dust Creek and the surrounding territory. Stone was a man who had built his reputation on violence, on his willingness to shoot first and ask questions later, particularly when the questions involved native people. He had killed at least a dozen native men during his years as a marshal, always claiming self-defense, always backed by a legal system that accepted his word without question. He was known for his particular cruelty in pursuing native people who had been accused of crimes, hunting them down like animals and bringing back their bodies as proof of his efficiency. Thomas encountered Marshal Stone at the livery stable, where Dr. Cole had taken him to see a newly arrived horse. Stone was there, checking on his own mount, and the moment Thomas saw him, the spirits erupted with an intensity that was almost physical. Their message was so loud and insistent that Thomas couldn't help but speak it aloud. "You killed my uncle," Thomas said, his voice carrying across the sudden silence that fell over the stable. His name was Standing Bear. He was hunting deer in the mountains, providing for his family, when you shot him from your horse. You said he was a threat, but he was unarmed. You shot him and left his body for the wolves. The spirits say you've killed 43 of my people, 43 souls crying for justice. They say your judgment is coming, and it will be as merciless as the judgments you handed down. The reaction was immediate and violent. Marshal Stone, his face purple with rage, drew his pistol and pointed it at Thomas. "That boy is a menace," he shouted. "He's been putting curses on people since he got here. I'm going to put him down like the rabid animal he is." Dr. Cole positioned himself between Thomas and the marshal, his own hand on his pistol. "You'll do no such thing, Stone. This boy is under my protection. He's speaking from a place of grief and trauma, not making threats. Lower your weapon." For a long moment, the two men stared at each other, the tension in the stable thick enough to cut. Finally, Stone lowered his pistol, but his eyes promised violence. "This isn't over, Cole. That boy has pronounced a death sentence on me, based on lies and superstition. He'll be dealt with according to the law, or he'll be dealt with outside it. Either way, his time in this town is finished." Stone stormed out of the stable, leaving Dr. Cole and Thomas standing in the sudden silence. Dr. Cole knew he had only moments to act. He gathered Thomas quickly and returned to his cabin, where he began making immediate arrangements. "Thomas," he said urgently, "you need to leave Dust Creek tonight. Marshal Stone will send men to arrest you, possibly to lynch you without any pretense of legal process. I have contacts who can help you reach safety, but you must leave immediately." Thomas looked at him with those ancient eyes and said quietly, "It doesn't matter if I leave, Dr. Cole. The marshal will die within 3 days regardless of where I am. The spirits have already pronounced their judgment. His death is already set in motion. But you're right that I should leave. Not to save him, but to save you from being implicated in what's coming." That night, Dr. Cole arranged for Thomas to be taken by trusted allies along a secret route towards safety. He gave the boy what money he could spare and letters of introduction to people in California who might help him. And he held Thomas close for a moment, this extraordinary child who had changed his understanding of reality itself. "Will I ever see you again?" he asked. Thomas smiled sadly. "The spirits show me many possible futures, Dr. Cole. In some we meet again. In others we don't. But in all of them, I remember you as the one person who saw me as human first, as exceptional second. You treated me with dignity when the world wanted to treat me as either a savage or a monster. I'll carry that with me wherever I go." Thomas Running Bear disappeared into the night, guided by people who risked everything to help native children escape the violence that was engulfing the West. Dr. Cole never saw him again, though he spent the rest of his life wondering what became of the extraordinary boy who had briefly illuminated his understanding of human potential. 3 days after Thomas's departure, Marshal Jedediah Stone was found dead in his office. He had apparently suffered a massive stroke. His body discovered slumped over his desk, but those who prepared his body for burial reported strange details. His eyes were wide open, frozen in an expression of absolute terror. His mouth was open in a silent scream, and witnesses claimed that in the moments before his death, people in the street had heard what sounded like many voices, all speaking at once, though no one could make out the words. The native people in the region whispered that the ghosts of all the people Stone had killed had come to collect their debt, that they had surrounded him in his final moments and shown him the faces of everyone he had destroyed. Dr. Harrison Cole continued his medical practice in Dust Creek until the outbreak of the Civil War in 1861, when Nevada became a state in 1864. He was appointed as the first health officer for the region, using his position to advocate for better treatment of native people and to document the devastating impact of disease and violence on tribal communities. In his journals from this period, he wrote extensively about Thomas, trying to make sense of what he had witnessed and documented during their time together. He developed a theory that Thomas represented a form of heightened perception that all humans possessed, but few could access, a connection to something deeper and more fundamental than ordinary consciousness. But even as he formulated scientific explanations, he could not fully dismiss the possibility that Thomas's gifts were exactly what he claimed them to be. Communications from the spirit world, messages from ancestors who refused to let their suffering be forgotten. Dr. Cole died in 1895, but before his death, he arranged for his journals to be donated to a medical college in San Francisco with specific instructions that they be sealed for 50 years. He did not want Thomas to be hunted or studied as a curiosity, but he also believed that future generations might benefit from the careful documentation he had compiled. Those journals were opened in 1945 and studied by researchers trying to understand the limits of human perception and consciousness. The case of Thomas Running Bear became the subject of academic papers in psychology, neurology, and even parapsychology. But the journals raised more questions than they answered, providing meticulous documentation of extraordinary events without offering any definitive explanation for how such events were possible. As for Thomas Running Bear himself, his story does not end with his departure from Dust Creek. Reports of a native boy with uncanny abilities began appearing in California and Oregon in the early 1860s. A child in a Shasta village who could diagnose illnesses with remarkable accuracy despite no medical training. A young man in a mining camp who helped locate missing prospectors by claiming to hear their voices calling for help. A teenager in the redwoods who seemed to know which trails were safe and which were haunted by spirits. Whether these were all the same person or whether Thomas's gifts were less unique than Dr. Cole believed remains unknown. During the Modoc War of 1872-73, stories emerged of a young native man working with both sides to try to negotiate peace. A man who seemed to know the thoughts of both the Modoc leaders and the army officers, who could predict when negotiations would fail and violence would erupt. Some accounts describe a man with eyes like dark river stones who would stand on the lava beds after battles, tears streaming down his face, speaking to the dead as if he could see and hear them. Several army officers mentioned in their reports a remarkable native man named Thomas, who possessed intelligence and abilities that exceeded anything they had previously encountered. But official military records from the period are incomplete and often contradictory. After the Modoc War ended, and the surviving fighters were executed or imprisoned, reports of Thomas became less frequent, but more disturbing. He appeared in places where violence against native people was occurring, massacres, forced removals, reservation conditions so brutal that children died by the hundreds. Survivors of these atrocities sometimes mentioned a thin native man with ancient eyes who would appear afterward, documenting what had happened, recording the names of the dead, bearing witness to horrors that the official historical record would try to erase or minimize. Some claimed he could identify the perpetrators of violence even when they wore uniforms or claimed to be acting under orders. That he spoke the names of murderers with absolute certainty, names that the spirits from the mountains had revealed to him. One of the most detailed accounts comes from the Wounded Knee Massacre in 1890, where U.S. cavalry troops killed between 250 and 300 Lakota men, women, and children. A survivor named Black Elk later described a man who appeared after the massacre, walking among the frozen bodies, speaking to them as if they could hear him. He was taking down their names. Black Elk recalled in an account recorded years later. He said the spirits told him each name, told him who they had been in life, who their families were. He said he was making a record that couldn't be destroyed or forgotten, a record that would last longer than any written document. I asked him how he could stand to be among so much death, and he said, "I've been walking among the dead since I was 4 years old. They're no more frightening than the living. Often they're more honest." After 1890, there are no further documented sightings of Thomas Running Bear, though his legend persisted in native communities throughout the West. He became a figure of hope and warning, a story parents told their children. Sometimes as a reminder that the spirits were always watching, that justice would eventually come. Sometimes as a source of comfort that no matter what was done to native people, someone was recording it all, and one day there would be a reckoning. Some claimed he had died, finally released from the burden of hearing spirits that never stopped speaking. Others insisted he had found a way to silence the spirits and live a normal life under a new identity. Still others believed he was still out there somewhere, still walking among the dead, still recording the names and stories of native people whose suffering might otherwise be forgotten. Dr. Cole's journals end with a reflection, written shortly before his death, that captures both the mystery and the meaning of Thomas Running Bear's story. I spent years trying to understand Thomas scientifically, trying to find a rational explanation for abilities that defied rational explanation. But perhaps I was asking the wrong questions. Perhaps the point was never to understand how he did what he did, but rather to recognize what his existence meant. Thomas Running Bear was proof that native people possessed capabilities and intelligence that the society of his time refused to acknowledge. He was proof that oppression and suffering do not destroy the human spirit, but sometimes refine it into something extraordinary. He was proof that justice, even when denied by human institutions, finds ways to assert itself through unexpected channels. Whether his spirits were real or metaphorical, whether his gift was supernatural or simply an expression of human potential we don't yet understand, the result was the same. Truths were revealed, crimes were exposed, and a child who should have been crushed by the weight of conquest and displacement instead became a force for accountability and remembrance. That matters more than any scientific explanation I could have provided. The story of Thomas Running Bear challenges us to confront uncomfortable questions about genius, about gifts that exceed normal human capacity, and about how society responds when those gifts manifest in people it has designated as inferior. How many other Thomas Running Bears existed in the centuries of American expansion? Brilliant minds, extraordinary abilities, children with gifts that could have changed the world, who were destroyed before they could fully manifest their potential. How many voices were silenced? How many gifts were crushed? How many possibilities were erased by a system designed to deny the full humanity of an entire people? Thomas Running Bear was exceptional, but the conditions that shaped him were not. Every native child born during the conquest faced the same existential threat, the same denial of basic humanity, the same violent suppression of potential. Thomas survived and found ways to use his gifts because a few people, his mother, sage woman, William Bent, Dr. Cole, the guides who led him to safety, chose to see him as human first and protected him when they could. But for every Thomas Running Bear who found protection, thousands of others did not. Their stories are lost, their names forgotten, their gifts never realized because they were born into a system designed to destroy exactly what made them extraordinary. The mystery of Thomas Running Bear ultimately is not about whether his spirits were real or whether he truly possessed supernatural abilities. The mystery is about what it means to be human, to possess gifts and intelligence and potential in a world that denies your right to exist as a full person. The mystery is about how genius survives oppression, how truth finds voice even when speaking truth is dangerous, how justice asserts itself even when every official institution denies it. The mystery is about the countless brilliant native minds that existed in the darkness of conquest and the centuries that followed. Minds that changed their communities in quiet ways, even when they couldn't change the larger world. Thomas Running Bear may have heard voices from the mountains, or he may have simply been so attuned to the suffering of his people that he could sense injustice the way others sense changes in the weather. Either way, he represented something that terrified the architects of manifest destiny. Proof that the entire edifice of racial hierarchy was built on lies. His intelligence, his gifts, his very existence challenged every justification for conquest and displacement. That's why his story was buried. That's why the official records were destroyed or hidden. That's why even the detailed documentation Dr. Cole compiled was sealed away for decades. Thomas Running Bear was dangerous not because of how people died around him, but because of what he proved by living. That native humanity, native intelligence, native potential could not be erased, no matter how brutal the system designed to accomplish that erasure. What do you think of this story? Do you believe Thomas Running Bear truly heard spirits from the mountains? Or was his gift something else entirely? A form of human perception we still don't fully understand. Have you heard stories in your own family about ancestors who seemed to know things they shouldn't have known, who had gifts that defied explanation? Leave your comment below and let us know your thoughts about this remarkable chapter in Native American history. If you found this story powerful and want to hear more untold stories of extraordinary native people who changed history in ways that were never properly recognized, subscribe to our channel, hit that notification bell, and share this video with someone who needs to know that our ancestors were brilliant, powerful, and extraordinary even in the darkest circumstances. Remember, the stories they tried to erase are the stories we must tell loudest. The voices they tried to silence are the voices we must amplify. And the lives they tried to reduce to obstacles and statistics were lives full of intelligence, gifts, and humanity that changed the world, even when the world refused to acknowledge it. See you in the next video, where we continue to uncover the hidden history of our people.